Hello everyone and welcome to Paranormal Pathways. Today we're exploring the world of Dogman encounters from around the internet. Let's dive in and find out what just growled from the bushes. Hey all, I wanted to share the story of my Dogman sighting. And yes, I am doing so on a throwaway account. I have told a few of my friends, and they have mostly said I must have misidentified whatever I saw. I felt the need to tell my story in a place where at least I know there are some other skeptics like myself, so here it is. I was staying in the Catskill Mountains in New York for a few days. I had booked an Airbnb with my girlfriend where we could bring our dog, a 100-pound German Shepherd. The Airbnb was a strange RV that was expanded into a cabin. The place was far away from any other houses, and on the side road, basically on the side of a mountain overlooking an amazing view. The stay had 2 fire pits. One was right next to the cabin, and the other was about 800 feet away on top of a hill. The last night we were there, we were having one last fire in the faraway fire pit. The fire pit had a great view of the mountain range, cornfields on one side, and the other side sat against the wood line. We had our dog off leash. He is very well-mannered, and we were playing some music on a Bluetooth speaker. Our dog kept looking towards the wood line, and it was freaking my girlfriend out. We would occasionally turn the music off and just listen to see if we could hear anything. I also had a small LED flashlight and would scan the woods with it, looking for any animal eyes it picked up. Well, after a little bit of this, my dog jumped up to his feet and started full force aggressively growling at the woods, which was very out of character for him. Just when I was getting up and turning the music off, my dog darted at the woods, maintaining his high alert status. He juked left, and I heard something take only a few steps back in response. I was able to call him back to me right away, at which point he crept back, keeping his eyes locked on this creature. As my girlfriend held our dog's collar, I stepped closer into the woods with my flashlight and small knife in hand. As I was scanning the woods, my flashlight picked up on a set of eyes, which now looked and sounded a lot further back than we had heard the steps. The eyes were glowing like a dog's eyes in the light of my LED flashlight, but the height is what threw me off. It was too tall to be any animal I would expect to see: raccoon, coyote, skunk, etc. I figured it was a black bear, although black bears are very skittish to people and especially dogs, unless protecting their young, so it wasn't adding up in my head. I sat there for a solid 3 to 4 minutes trying to focus on what this was. The eyes also didn't look like a bear. It looked like a crouching dog. I was lost in my curiosity, and my girlfriend went into almost shock, put the music back on and said, "We're getting out of here and going inside." I kept telling her to turn the music off and started walking back to her without turning from the woods, but I wasn't going to stay out there alone. She started dragging our dog back to the cabin, and my dog and I had our eyes fixed on the woods. As soon as my flashlight went off, the creature, it started following alongside of us in the woodline. The footsteps I heard sounded like a person walking in the woods, and as it followed us, I heard at least 2 separate sets walking near it in the woods. We got inside the cabin, locked the door, and shut all the blinds, and were completely freaked out. I spent the next hour or so listening and watching out the window, hoping the animal would walk into the spotlight off the cabin so I could identify it. I never saw anything step out, but the footsteps continued walking around back there, behind the cabin, in the woods. I stepped out the door about an hour or 2 later, but heard nothing and searched with my flashlight. Whatever I heard that night was not afraid of my dog, and I've never seen my dog act like this. My dog will chase rabbits and even deer without making a sound. Luckily, he always comes back to me when I call him. I have spent a lot of time outdoors in my life, and have always been able to identify any animal encounters. I have asked a lot of my hunting friends about this and asked what, if any, animal would react like this and not instantly run away from a dog of his size. The mystery of not knowing is what creeps me out the worst. I had never heard of Dogman at the time, so it didn't even cross my mind during the sighting until I started researching crouching dog sightings online. My girlfriend hates to talk about whatever I saw and we heard that night, so here I am presenting my story as a hopeful skeptic. Here are just a few of the comments from this post. Emergency Rip 7361 commented, "Could well have been a Dogman, maybe 3 of them. They are often curious about humans when they encounter them. The remote location and their tracking behavior is consistent with many other Dogman sightings. Check out the hundreds of interviews on Vic Cundiff's Dogman Encounters on YouTube. Eyes Snake's Art also commented, "Color me intrigued. Did you check the field line the next morning for tracks or scat or fur or to get a sense of scale? Can you contact the owner to see if there are any more encounters?" OP responded to Eyes Snake's Art, "I did check the woods where I'd seen it. Looked all over but couldn't find any trace or anything. I even had my dog sniff around to see if he could point any trail out to me. There was a small trail leading into the woods next to it. I walked down too. No sign of anything but scrap metal, and the trail eventually turned into private property further up the mountain." Eyes Snake's Art responded to OP, "I'd contact the owner or previous renters." Can one do that? I've never Airbnb'd. Explain the rental was fine, you aren't changing your rating, etc. But you saw something that you and your dog reacted to. Tell him or her everything you said in your post, except for the dogman parts. See if they have anything to say. Edit to clarify. If you can contact other renters, ask if they saw or heard anything. May fill in gaps. I was on my way to go camping and had just crossed the Mackinac Bridge to get to Michigan's Upper Peninsula. It was storming and just started pouring buckets of rain. There was not great visibility with the sheets of rain, but we both pointed out the man standing in the middle of the road, and we were worried he would get hit by a car. When he turned, it was not a man. It was a huge black dog. We both thought it was a man at first, and then it was a dog, and I can't explain it. It could have just been the combination of looking up from the bottom of a hill and the rain. I just think it is odd that my daughter and I both thought we saw a man. I stopped on one side of the road to help it, and so did a man on the other side in a truck. I love dogs, and always stop to help when I see one in the road, but I hoped that someone else would be able to help it because my truck was stuffed with camping stuff, and the only place it could go in my truck would be the front seat with my daughter and I. Seeing it up close, I was a bit surprised to see how big it was. I also felt uneasy and intimidated by this animal. It looked almost like a black German shepherd, but also wolfish. I was a dog groomer, so I have been around a lot of big dogs, and this one was huge. And if I had to guess what breed, I would say a wolf hybrid. The guy yelled over, asking if it was my dog, and I yelled back no. The man then yelled, "Here, boy," and patted his leg, and the dog ran off to him. Seeing the dog was being taken care of, I got back in my truck and got back on the road towards our camping destination. My daughter was telling me how it looked like a person standing in the road, and then when it turned, it was a dog. It may not be paranormal, but it was definitely an interesting experience. Here are some of the comments from this post. Gray Mares in Space commented, "Seeing a large black dog alone on a rainy night on the road is freaky, even if it was not paranormal." Buckshot00 also commented, "There used to be a small zoo on 2, right past Big Mac. The owner had some wolves and wolf dog hybrids. The hybrids were larger than the full-blooded wolves. I was lucky enough to visit it just before feeding time, and all the animals were out. I wouldn't be too surprised if it was a hybrid, or if it was standing on its back legs, which is always freaky when canines do it." Megabot13 responded to Buckshot00, "Why would one be standing on its back legs, though, in a road for no reason?" Buckshot00 responded to Megabot13. "Wolves, other canines, and bears will sometimes stand on their hind legs for a variety of reasons. Could be to get a better view, could be intimidation, could be an injury. There are many reasons. Just because the reason isn't readily discernible to us doesn't mean there was no reason. I've posted links to it in the past on this sub, but there's plenty of photo and even video evidence of wolves doing this. Admittedly, it's freaky, but that's my point. It's not something anyone is really expecting, and it messes with our heads. People like to believe they know how wild animals behave, but they're capable of learning new behaviors. But for wolves, this doesn't seem to be new at all, just not typical." Okay, cardiologists. 8925 responded to Buckshot00. "Had a similar experience. One time at the old house we used to rent, my brother and I had just finished helping our dad put in a small garden on the backside of the house that faces the woods. The woods we were next to were very vast and actually connected with multiple properties before turning into dense forest. So it's about 8 p.m. and getting dark. We look over into the woods about 50 feet from us and see what we thought was a big black dog. We are talking like the size of a Scooby-Doo dog, Great Dane. We both just stood there staring at it. I thought it might have been a neighbor's or something that got loose. This happened all the time, so I kind of moved into its line of sight and made a squeaky noise to get its attention. Don't ever do this with a wild animal. It was then the thing stood up and jumped about 6 or 7 feet into the air, then turned and galloped into the woods, never to be seen again. It was a giant freaking rabbit. I mean huge, size of a Great Dane. Its color was like a pure black mixed with a charcoal gray. Hello everyone. Hope everyone is having a great day or night. A few people have asked me to tell my story on here a few times, so here goes. It's going to be a bit of a long one. This was about 23 years ago, and I had no clue what a dogman was, and I didn't believe in anything supernatural back then. I was hunting wild hogs in one of the southernmost areas of the Great Dismal Swamp. This is far south of the wildlife refuge, where it ends, at the Albemarle Sound in eastern North Carolina. I had put my boat in the water at a friend's house, about a half hour by water from where I went into the swamp at. This was in late November, so it was pretty cold and really overcast, and it gets dark around 5 or so. It was about noon when I tied up and got out of the boat. First hour or so was pretty uneventful. I was working my way inland. Some of this part of the swamp can be walked through when the tide is low, and it's just marshy with deeper canals and bogs scattered about. But there aren't any trails or marked paths or anything, so you will have to pay attention where you're going, and definitely need a compass since you can't see the sun. It's pretty dark in there, even on bright and sunny days. I was back in there about 2 hours, and looking for sign of hogs. I could tell some had been back there at some point, but it had been a while. I got a little further in and started smelling what I had thought was a boar. It's rutting season, and male wild hogs have a very distinct smell. It's musky and kind of fermented smell, mixed with old poop and urine. Kind of hard to explain if you've never smelled it before. However, this was different. It was musky, but more like an outside dog that's soaking wet. I stopped to look and listen, and after 10 or so minutes, I started hearing a snuffling, breathing that came and went. After a bit, I started to hear some growling. I started to get a little freaked out because it didn't sound like a hog, and it sounded big. I stopped again and knelt down and waited and looked around. Where I was at, the brush was pretty thick, so I really couldn't see more than 20 or so feet in any direction. That's when I started seeing movement. It definitely wasn't moving like a hog. It was kind of low walking, crouched down, but not on all fours, and I was only getting glimpses of it, and it would stop. It was probably about 40 feet away. This is when I actually start getting scared. I was born in northeastern Kentucky and spent most of my free time as a kid in the woods, camping, riding dirt bikes, and have always been comfortable even in the deep woods. So when I moved to North Carolina, I fell in love with the swamp. This is the first time I think I had ever felt real and actual fear. I had Mossberg 590 shotgun full of 3 double-aught buckshot, but no extra shells and no pistol. The 590 also has a bayonet lug, so I took out the bayonet and put it on. I started backing up, not taking my eyes off where I had last seen whatever it was. A few minutes later, I hear it again, a little further over to my left. I'm probably about 3/4 of a mile into the swamp, which doesn't seem very far, but the terrain doesn't make for really quick movement. This goes on for about another 20 minutes while backtracking out as fast as I can, and I'm still hearing it and catching glimpses of movement, and the smell is getting stronger. After a bit, I realize that this thing has gotten between me and the way I came in from my boat, and I'm starting to panic. I try to start getting further away from it and headed in the right direction. And then I see it again, and it's standing up, and it's pretty damn tall. It was still back in the brush, so I couldn't really make out any details, as it was dark as hell back there. I wanted to cry and run, but I knew that was a bad. It didn't seem like it wanted to get in the water. So I started wading through the canal and headed back toward my boat. I started to put some distance between it and myself, so I got back on hard ground to move a little faster. But I can still hear it snuffling and growling and moving through the brush, but it's not close anymore. I made it back to my boat, and I'm soaking wet and freezing, but I thank God I made it out of there, and just in time as it's getting foggy and starting to drizzle. I had never been that scared in my life. I made it back to my buddy's house and told him what happened, and I can tell he knows something when I tell him where I went. He brings me in and gives me some hot coffee with a big slug of bourbon in it. When I calm down, he takes me to the other house out back of his property to where his granddad lives. I'd met his granddad before, but he had always been kinda standoffish to me. I found out later he just had real bad PTSD from Korea, and he, my buddy and his family, had lived in that area since after the Civil War. I think his granddad's great-granddad had been a slave around there. But that's a story for another day. I guess what I mean to say is his family had history in that area and knew the place a lot better than me. After I told his granddad what happened, he stood up, looked me in the eye, and said, "Don't go back in there. You're lucky you made it out. That's where the big dogs live." I left and went home and slept for about 18 hours. I tried to forget about that experience and started to believe I was just seeing shit and freaked myself out. I eventually forgot all about it. Until a few years ago, when a Dogman Encounters video came up in my YouTube feed, I was curious what the hell a Dogman was, so I started listening to it, and that whole experience came flooding back to mind. It was very similar to what happened to me. I started looking into it, and there have been other sightings and encounters in eastern North Carolina, so that's my story. I'm 44 now and still live in coastal North Carolina, but haven't been back anywhere close to that area. I still hunt and love the outdoors and the swamp, but don't go too far in anymore. Here are some of the comments from this post. Puzzle-headed Look 989 commented, "Sounds like an intense one, my man. These things ain't no joke. I've heard several stories where elderly folk who've lived in the areas for years and years have these type of stories, where they almost act like it's a common understanding that they're living in the woods around them. Terrifying." Free Horse also commented, "Well shit, you definitely deserve that brandy after all that. Thanks for sharing your story. I'm sure reliving that experience must not be pleasant. I did an internship many years ago in North Carolina. Though I mostly stayed in the city around Raleigh, I hated driving anywhere out there where the forest took over. Could never shake the feeling of being watched out that way. Honestly, I chalked it up to that whole state just being haunted. But now I know better. Yikes. Did the head of the Dogman have a distinct shape? Doberman ears? Did you see a tail?" OP responded to Free Horse, "Yeah, there are some places that just give you a creepy feeling driving through. Years ago, I lived in Raleigh when my girlfriend then was going to North Carolina State and would go back and forth to the coast on Thursday night and drive back on Sunday. There are definitely some stretches in Columbia that I didn't want to break down in. As far as the head and ears, I never got a good enough look at it to make out any kind of features. It was really overcast with dark clouds that day, and the trees and brush made it even darker. I'm sure if it had gotten close enough to make out features, I would have popped 4 or 5 shells into it and ran my ass off. As scared as I was, I still had the sense to remember the most important gun safety rule: to be sure of your target and what's behind it. I didn't know what the hell it was. I just knew it was big, and it was stalking me." This post has many more amazing comments. If you want to dig deeper, the link is in the description below. Hi, so I just found this sub and figured you guys may be interested in this. I was on an episode of Dogman Encounters Radio once about this encounter. So when I was younger, 16 or 17, I think I had an encounter with something strange in the forests near Danbury, Wisconsin. Background on me is that I am 6'4" and athletic. I am a hunter, camper, and martial artist, generally a survivalist. I was naive and didn't give nature the proper level of respect, and basically was a cocky teenager who felt invincible. Our cabin had been on Long Lake in Danbury, Wisconsin. The whole area is forested for the most part. I was there on vacation with my cousin and grandparents. It was a nice and hot summer day, and we had decided to play airsoft. I took airsoft really seriously. I wore a full BDU Woodland with a camouflage mask. My cousin just wore jeans and a t-shirt. We had a battle, which I took into the woods where I felt comfortable. We were about 150 meters into the forest when we stopped. Then I decided to tease my cousin. I shushed him and said, "We were being watched," jokingly. Unfortunately, it turned out to not be much of a joke, because I immediately then noticed that the woods were dead quiet, which only happens when a large predator is around. I was on edge very quickly. Next, the feeling of being watched hit hard, so I started scanning the surrounding area, then I saw it. The whitish teeth gave it away. What I saw was at the edge of a clearing, about 40 meters from us, crouched and holding onto a tree with its left hand. It was panting and watching us with its ears up. It had reddish-brown hair, fur, and looked canine. In my head, it clicked as a werewolf. I said to my cousin, "We have to go," and he bolted. I still had my eyes on it when my cousin started sprinting. The creature charged. It ran on 2 legs for maybe 10 feet and then dropped to all 4s. Then I turned and sprinted. I could hear it crashing through the woods behind us, then we run out of the woods. Once back at the cabin, we discussed it. It's still unclear if my cousin saw it. I told him I thought it was a bear to not freak him out, but I know bears. It wasn't a bear. I started doing research on these things after my encounter, which brought me to many Dogman-related sites. What I saw coincides with other people's sightings. I am now far better about respecting nature, and I am extremely cautious with the forests. If I go into nature alone, I am always armed, but I prefer to not be alone. Always trust your senses. Here are some of the comments from this post. Cry of the Banshee commented, "Good instincts. Regardless of what it was, if your body is telling you to get the hell out of there, the majority of the time, it's absolutely right." Meowing Tin questioned, "Did it look muscular or was it more skinny, bony?" OP responded to Meowing Tin, "Really muscular, I could see the definition through the fur. If it were nude, it would have looked like a bodybuilder." There are quite a few more comments on this post. If you would like to dig deeper, the link is in the description below. Hi all. So, I know in the past I said on here that I mentioned an encounter with what I think may have been a dogman, yet haven't posted the full story. It's taken me a while to find the time, and it's taken a long time for the trauma to settle so that this period in my life could be looked at from a more objective viewpoint. I've never really revealed anything this personal to the general public before, and I anticipate this post may get a bit more attention as well, so it's a bit nerve-wracking for me. But after keeping it secret for years, I think it's about time this becomes known. Before anyone gets so invested in this post, I should note that I did not actually see that much of the dogman. I put that in quotes because I am still not 100% sure if that is what it was, but I still find it the most plausible. This is more about the experience and how it and the creature has affected my life. So, here it is. This experience took place when I was 10 years old. At the time, I only had my mother taking care of me, no father around. We lived in with my great-grandmother in Pennsylvania for the majority of my childhood. My mom had made friends with a woman who owned a large lakefront property near Lake Michigan in Wisconsin. She made an offer to let us live in a small cabin on the property she owned in exchange for work at her art shop. So, we ended up flying up in approximately 2007. One thing that helps me remember the year is that the next year after we came back, Obama was elected president. Now this property was located in a relatively isolated area. There were other inhabitants in the general area, but from the main road you would have to turn onto this gravel road that led into this heavily wooded area, drive for a minute or two, and then you would be on the property. On this property was a small, deep pond, a shed, the woman's house, which was decent, not too upscale, but better than our cabin. And behind the house was a cliff that overlooked a shoreline of Lake Michigan. Once you get into the property, you are surrounded by woods. In hindsight, it sounds like I'm describing a horror movie setting. So when we first arrived there, I believe it was mid or late summer, possibly early fall. One weird detail was the presence of this large, red, dead fish that was just lying on the ground. I found it in between the small, deep pond and the shed. It was so out of place. It was a big fish and couldn't have come from that little pond. I have tried to Google what types of large red fish live in Lake Michigan, but nothing I found looks like the fish I saw. The closest thing I could compare it to was a red snapper. Now that I look it up, it looks a lot like it. Part of my mind is trying to rationalize this as maybe someone from the woman's household bought it, didn't like it, and threw it out, but why? Anyway, that was just the first of many odd things that occurred. I honestly can't remember too many other normal life details of my time spent in Wisconsin since we were barely there a year. But when winter came, that's when I remember things started to get a little strange. In the snow around the shed, there were these odd, huge footprints. Thing is, I remember them being round and sort of compared their roundness to an elephant's foot, but I don't think they were that round, just rounder than any normal snow footprint I've seen. My mother chalked them up to bear footprints, since that was the only rational explanation we could come up with. But I don't remember them being shaped like a bear's. There were also some other strange snow prints. One of them looked like someone put on a pair of snow skis and walked through the snow a little. Strange thing about them is, after a while, they just stopped. My mother was weirded out about these ones. It was like whatever was walking there flew away or disappeared or something. I've considered that someone around there may have been walking in snow skis, but this was a fairly level, dense forest. My mom said she heard something on the radio about a wallaby escaping from captivity or something, so we just kind of sort of assumed it may have been that. We made a cute little song about bears and wallabies playing on the range or something. Now for the shitty part. Fast forward a couple months. It was in the middle of winter, and it was absolutely freezing cold outside. We're talking sub-zero temperatures. I think because we were so close to the lake, it was worse. This encounter happened late at night. Our cottage had one floor and a loft where I slept. I can't remember every detail of what exactly happened, but everything seemed normal until I was woken up by my mother, panicking in the middle of the night. She ordered me to stay up in the loft and not come down. I was so confused and scared because I had never seen her act like this, and she wouldn't tell me what was going on. She had me bring up the ladder so in case something got in, it would have a harder time reaching me. So for about what felt like an hour, I stayed in the loft watching my mom as she was looking at the window with a knife in one hand and a phone on the other, scared shitless until the police arrived. When they got there, she told them she heard banging on the side of our cottage, which didn't make sense to me at the time because I didn't hear anything like that. We left the place that night and found a motel which was just about to close until we came. I remember what that room looked like. That was without a doubt the most traumatic night in my life. I thought we were gonna die because something was after us, and I'm pretty sure my mom did too. We had just moved to this cottage in Wisconsin, and we weren't even there for a full year. The incident was so terrifying that my mom immediately booked a flight back to Pennsylvania, where we originally lived, but our flight was delayed. I remember doing what kids do, be impatient and move around a lot in the airport. I had stepped on a metal part of this flat escalator, which left dirt marks. This janitor guy got mad at me, and so did my mother, and I went back to feeling like shit. While we were sitting in the waiting area, there was this rude family with a girl who was making fun of me for some reason, pointing and laughing at me a little bit. We were unfortunately seated next to each other on the flight, and for some reason, she started picking off her hair and placing them on my mom. It was an awkward flight with a lot of tension, which made it even worse. I also remember cussing at them on the way out of the airport. It was out of character for me to do, but goddamn was I out of it. Since we were, and still are, very poor, we have lived with my great-grandmother for most of my childhood, never truly owning a home or property. So when we left Wisconsin, we had to come back. Things seemed to be normal for a while, and it had been a couple months after this incident. Then for some unknown reason, my mother began behaving extremely neurotic, which I had no clue why. It really fucking stressed me out when she would do this. I can't exactly remember what she was doing, but it was enough to stress a young child out. One day, she slept for longer than usual, and when she woke up, she thought she had urinated blood as her urine was a darkish color. She kept saying that she had missing time, like she had experienced an unusual amount of missing time or something. This insanity went on for about a week or so. Now, for my encounter. So on one of those nights, we were in the kitchen, my mom was making something to eat, and I was sitting at the dinner table staring outside the kitchen window. The house we lived in sat on a large incline that overlooked the town area, and I was looking at the lights from the city. Right outside of the house, near this window, was a large oak tree that was close to our house, with its branches being above the window about 10 to 30 feet away. It was dark, so you couldn't see anything else but the distant lights. So, as I was sitting there, staring at the town lights, something red appeared in the peripheral corner of my eye. I had thought it was another city light, so my vision slowly wandered over until I was looking directly at it. One singular glowing eye, sort of reptilian in shape. From my memory, it's not exactly like how Mothman is usually described. I sort of remember a slit pupil like a lizard, sort of like this, but more luminous. I don't remember seeing another red eye, but it may have been obstructed by leaves or branches. I sat there kind of daydreaming a bit, not totally comprehending what I was seeing. Then it blinked. It fucking blinked. I remember backing away from the table saying, "Oh no, please no," and telling my mom there was something outside of the window. She looked and saw it, but didn't immediately panic panic like I did. Honestly, this night might have been worse than the first. No, actually, I think it was because I saw it. We went up into the bedroom and were just kind of sitting there, clueless on what to do. My mom resorted back to her manic behavior and basically stayed praying over me until I fell asleep. She was still doing it when I woke up. Then we got into my mom's van and left. What happened next was super fucking stressful, to the point where I just wanted to die. For the next day or two, my mother would drive us around aimlessly in her van. She didn't have any direction or destination. She just drove crazed out of her mind. We would occasionally stop back at our grandmother's house in the daytime, but we wouldn't stay there at night. At some point, a mattress was brought into the back of her van for me to sleep on. I think we stayed in a lighted parking lot the night when I fell asleep. When I woke up, she was still driving around. I fucking hated and pleaded and begged for her to let us just go back home, even though I was also scared about returning. After much coercion and persuasion, I eventually talked her into going back to our grandmother's house so I could sleep in a comfortable bed. I was still just a kid and was really fucking tired of this bullshit. She was so paranoid and panicked that when we came back, she didn't let me eat the food she had previously made, even though it was perfectly fine. I was hungry, and to this day, I hate letting any food go to waste. I had a collection of stuffed animals that meant a lot to me as memorabilia. She put them all in a black trash bag. I found them, but she still wouldn't let me have them. I think she burned them. She, because she was burning a bunch of other stuff because of her out-of-control, manic mental state. God, I fucking hated that she did that. This hurt me a lot. I love those things. She ended up putting multiple cross statues and Jesus pictures across the house, as well as outside, on the porch, on the oak tree. Even put some cross symbols on doors around the house. You know, this is actually kind of painful to remember now, even though it's so far back and removed, like mentally painful. One other odd thing that happened though, while she was burning things, my grandmother gave my mom this old Bible-looking book for some reason. This just wasn't any old Bible either. It had a hard leather covering with some sort of carving on the cover. This Bible was in a language I did not know, but used the English alphabet characters. It had old-looking black and white images that looked medieval in style, though I can't remember what they depicted. Probably some disturbing medieval art. My mom burned it. For the longest time, I was perplexed about what this book was, what it meant to my grandma. Was it truly a cursed and evil item that needed to be destroyed? I spent some time searching for clues and found what looks almost exactly like the Bible my mom burned. Here it is. I can't remember if this was exactly what this Bible looked like, but it's pretty damn close. Does anyone here know anything about this Bible? I also read that it might be Lutheran. Eventually, we found a place to stay with one of my mom's friends in her basement. Stayed there for a week or two, and then eventually a shelter for abused women. It did work out though, since we received some help after that and found a place in Ohio where we could live. This incident became a thing we were able to eventually leave in the past and get over, but occasionally we do bring it up and talk about it since. At first it was hard because she would not talk about it at all, but later on we were able to discuss it, and I got her to tell me what she saw outside our cabin in Wisconsin. What she said she saw were two red lights about 50 to 100 feet away from our cottage. She showed me how it was moving, whatever it was, not erratically, but keeping its distance. Behind our cottage was this heavily forested area. This thing was about 50 to 100 feet away from our cottage in this forested area. Mom physically showed how it was sort of getting closer to the cottage. Though it was still a considerable distance away, the two red lights never got close, or at least close enough for her to describe any features other than those two red lights. She would not let me come down from the loft to check out why she was panicking and what was happening. She had called the police and said that she had heard banging on the side of our cottage because she knew that was more believable than if she were to describe what she was seeing. She had a knife the whole time before the cops came. As soon as the cop car arrived, she said whatever this thing was, looked over at the police lights coming through, turned around and took off running near a dilapidated barn that was located near where this thing was, further back into the forest. I never had a glimpse at this thing in Wisconsin. At first, she chalked it up to somebody with red goggles stalking us, or maybe playing a prank. She was surprisingly skeptical about it being something like a cryptid. However, this argument doesn't really hold up because during our first encounter in Wisconsin, it was late at night during winter. It was extremely cold up where we lived, and especially since we lived right next to a great lake, I don't think anybody would have been out there to play a prank like that or try and spy on us through a small window in our cottage. Now this is where a strange little discrepancy pops up. Sometime after the first encounter of this thing in Wisconsin, we again had an encounter with a red, glowing-eyed being right outside of our grandmother's house, which we had lived for many years secure and without paranormal incident. This, to me, suggests that this may have been the same entity in both encounters. So how did it travel such a distance? Why did it travel across many hundreds of miles just to harass us? It has no logic. Such a feat makes me believe that whatever we encountered was not a normal physical being bound by laws of physicality, and traversing such distances really would not be a problem for it. There's also the subject of what this really was. For many years, the only explanation that I could come up with is that it was an actual, real demon. Since this incident, it has popped up into my mind occasionally. Sometimes I would just happen to click myself into the paranormal side of YouTube, where they talk about cryptids and supernatural happenings and phenomena. This piqued my curiosity, and I began doing some online research, comparing other people's encounters and descriptions of various kinds to my own. I have since read, heard, and listened to other people's encounters with beings that also have glowing red eyes. This actually appears to be a common phenomena that comes up in such encounters. There are a few Bigfoot sightings which some are reported to have red eyes. Both the Mothman and the Flatwoods monster were described with red glowing eyes. I have read of 1 or 2 alien encounters where they had red eyes, and apparently dogmen are often reported as having glowing red eyes as well, though not all. This is definitely a supernatural phenomenon, and one that inspires fear. I would go back and forth in my mind trying to figure out which cryptid this could have been. I did not see the whole body. Thank God. If I saw a fucking giant werewolf-looking thing with murder eyes in a tree outside, my soul would have jumped out of my body. I have heard many other people on the DME podcast describe them with red eyes, and there was one episode in particular that reminded me of my own encounter. Only the guy could see the full body. He said it was also in a tree. Then there was the location. I think where I lived was not too far off from Bray Road, where the infamous beast of Bray Road was reported. That one had red eyes. I honestly don't have too much else to compare, but if anything would be living out in that forest, walking around in Antarctic winds and deep snow without a problem, it would probably be one of these beasts. I apologize that this post was so long and probably includes some unnecessary details. I originally just wanted to post my encounters with this thing that harassed us. It's just that I have never told anybody about this entire ordeal, this chapter of my life, mostly bound by paranoia coming from my mom. It almost feels kind of good to get off my chest, cathartic to type this out. To this day, that shit still sticks with me. Also, sorry if this post seems a bit unorganized and chaotic. I stayed up over an hour typing this out and haven't proofread it because I am tired and am about to go to sleep. I'm pretty nervous about how this is going to be received. I'll try and answer any questions if I'm able to and clear up anything that I might be misunderstood. Please understand that this is my first time really putting myself out here with this information. I know my mother said for me to always keep this whole ordeal a secret, but I could not talk about it any longer. So, in these recent years, my research has led me down a rabbit hole into fringe topics and strange subjects regarding the paranormal and the true nature of reality. After many years of reading, watching, listening, and research, I think I may have a theory about what dogmen actually are. But a lot of it has to do with, not sure how I should say this, but understanding what dogmen are requires a greater understanding about the true nature of reality itself. One needs an open mind for this. I say this because initially I disregarded this whole subject area as crazy schizophrenic bullshit, ironically unaware of how my own experiences could be labeled the same, even though these were objective experiences. I admit I don't have the whole picture, far from it, but slowly I am putting the pieces together. I'm actually glad I took so long to make this post, as a year or 2 ago I did not have the current knowledge or state of mind that I currently have. I think I might make a separate post about my theory of what I think dogmen actually are and how they're part of a greater aspect of our reality and existence, which is poorly understood. I hope one day I might be able to understand what dogmen are and also help others in doing so. There are many great comments to this post, but I couldn't include them due to time constraints. The link is in the description below. Let me preface this letter with a quick description of my background. I am a retired military veteran with 3 decades of active duty serving my country and its citizens. I've been honored and privileged to be in command on many occasions during my career and have seen both the bounty of peaceful time and the horror of all-out war. You name it, I've probably seen it and been through it in the U.S. military. I do not write this to impress. I merely wish to state the facts so that you may judge the accuracy of what I'm about to tell you. So now, the facts as I know them to be my first face-to-face encounter with Dogman. It was 5 years ago in 2019, and there have been more since then. My first Dogman experience took place in the western United States. I have a cabin in a national forest, which is nestled in a beautiful valley located 50 miles up a dirt road at a fairly high elevation, and is only accessible from late spring to late fall, depending on how early or late the snowfall is each year. Most years, it is impossible to get to the cabin from Thanksgiving through Labor Day due to heavy snow and ice on the dirt road that runs up to that part of the national forest. But 4 years ago in January, there was no snow, and since it is rare to be able to go there at that time of year, a friend and I decided to risk it and go up for New Year and planned on staying a week or so. We decided that if snow started falling while we were there, we'd retreat from it quickly and drive out in time before the road became impassable and safely make it down the mountain. We launched from the city, got to the cabin around midday, and found there were a few inches of snow on the ground around it. Ever alert for animal tracks and prints, I examined the snow for them. I found bear, deer, cougar prints, and something else I was unfamiliar with and had never seen before. I now know that they were Dogman tracks. Not knowing what the Dogman track were at the time I first saw them, I filed them away in my mind as a new experience and a new bit of data. Then, my friend and I began powering up and commissioning the cabin, turning on the power and the water and the gas. The cabin has living quarters on one side and a huge garage with 2 huge aircraft-style hangar doors to slide open. I unlocked and opened the hangar doors, about 6 feet wide. Then my friend and I began unloading the supplies from my Jeep, parked in the carport, and took them through the hangar and into the cabin proper. As the afternoon progressed, we settled in, restocked the cabin supplies, and cleaned a bit here and there. I never go unarmed into that wilderness, so one of the first things I like to do when I get to the cabin is to lay out whatever weapons I have brought with me on a big table out in the hangar. I did this and checked and loaded all the weapons. I also turned on and stocked the gas-powered refrigerator, which I keep out in the hangar with some of the food I had brought that needed to be kept cooled. Then I returned inside the cabin proper and settled in for an adult libation and an afternoon and bull session with my friend. After a bit of telling stories between ourselves, I noticed the sun had set behind the mountains, and it was beginning to get dark outside. It was time to begin prepping for dinner. I told my friend I would get some steaks out of the fridge in the hangar and went to do so. That's when something completely unexpected happened. As I walked through the door from the cabin into the hangar, I took 1, 2, 3 steps and froze. I was being sighted by something outside. It was staring at me through the open hangar doors with murderous intent. In that split second, all the hair on the back of my neck and arms stood straight up, and I started getting what I call my gut warning. I've only gotten those before when flying into live fire from the ground or when in other combat situations in wartime. Yet here I was in the middle of the American wilderness getting the very same well-known sensation stronger than ever. I was pretty certain that it was not a human. I didn't freeze, but my brain began racing. Instead of walking to the fridge, I quickly went over to the weapons table, picked up a large gauge handgun, checked if it was loaded, and stuck it in my belt. Then I picked up one of the already loaded rifles. Once armed, I then advanced towards the open hangar doors with the rifle in my hands. I got to the open hangar doors. I raised the rifle and started appraising the situation through its scope, swinging it to the left and to the right. It was so dark by then that I could see little but vague tree shapes and the blobs of bushes outside in the forest. Then suddenly, as I swung the rifle to the right, the feeling of being intently watched switched off, like flipping a light switch off. I stood there for a bit, waiting for the tingle of my intuitive gut warning sign to reappear. After a little while, the feeling of being watched didn't return, so I closed and locked the hangar doors, grabbed some dinner steaks from the fridge, and went back inside. Later that night, after dinner and KP duty, I armed myself. opened the cabin door, and stood in the doorway. As soon as I did, the feeling of being watched started up again, only not as intense as the first time. I stood there for a while, and then once again, the feeling of being watched switched off like a switch. The rest of the evening, I turned the sequence of events around and around in my head, but could not make any sense of this creature. It just didn't add up. Could it have been a murderous bear that had gotten a taste for long pig, human flesh? All of these thoughts and more went through my mind as I sat there gazing at the wood stove fire in front of me inside the cabin, and eventually I gave up obsessing about it. I told my friend we should hit our racks, so we turned in and slept straight through the night with no further incidents. You're probably asking why I didn't leave the cabin the next day. All I can say is that I am perhaps a little too stubborn and have never believed in retreat of any kind. To me, that is paying for the same ground twice. And you have to remember that I've been going to my cabin for 20 years now and have never experienced anything like being watched or hunted. Not ever. Not even close. The next morning, we did the usual shower and shave routine, and while having a cup of coffee outside in the carport, the feeling of being watched returned, only it was weaker, as if it was from a distance. As the feeling of being watched returned, I still couldn't make heads or tails of the situation I found myself in, but I was adapting as fast as I could. So, I told my friend we would be staying close to the cabin for the duration of our stay. I didn't want to take any chances with this new unknown threat, so I told my friend that I was concerned about bears in the area. My friend took this at face value and agreed to stay close to the cabin and its immediate grounds for the duration of our stay. In the days that followed, I got the sensation of being watched from time to time during the day, but it was always weak and seemed to be from far away. But every time I opened the cabin door at night and stood there looking out into the night, the feeling returned very strong and very close, like it was that very first night inside the partially open hangar doors. I forgot to mention that I have a pair of Generation 3 military night vision goggles. I use these every night when standing at the cabin door looking for whatever was outside watching us, each and every time I put the goggles on. The feeling of being watched switched off as I explained earlier. This whole situation was darn peculiar, and I just couldn't explain any of it in a rational way that made sense. All I knew was my training from the past, and that if I stuck to that, then my friend and I would be okay. If I developed a plan for the day, I felt it would be all right, and after all, we had plenty of weapons and food. The procedure I settled on was simple. Don't go outside at night, don't leave any doors open, and stay very close to the cabin at all times. Most of the time, we sat in the carport on folding camping chairs, just shooting the breeze. Also, keep yourself armed and have extra firearms close at hand, and most important, never ever go anywhere alone. By midweek, after being at the cabin for 4 days, we began to get used to this watcher, because it too was following a set of rules and never came into sight. It stayed a certain distance from the cabin. It made absolutely no noise at any time. At night, it came closer and stared at the cabin and waited for me to open the door and look around. As soon as I used the night vision goggles, it took off, and so forth and so on. On the 4th day at the cabin, my friend insisted on going on a hike. I sensed that I would have the opportunity to figure out who the watcher was. I was using my friend as bait for what I was mentally calling the watcher, but I really wanted to know what this thing was. I figured my friend would be safe with me well armed and watching them from a distance, so we agreed that he would hike down the dirt road for a short distance and then come back. My friend got ready to go, excited to get away from the cabin for a spell. I armed myself well. I holstered and put a large bore revolver on each hip. I double-checked the load on my AR-15 and slung it in front of me. Then, at the last moment, I don't know why, I slung my old trusty full-auto machine gun on my back. It is what you might call the spoils of war, and has never failed me in the past. My friend was ready to launch down the road, and I was just as ready to watch him do so. He took off, and I watched as he walked down the cabin access road to the main dirt road. As soon as he was out of sight, I jogged over to a knoll that had a commanding view of the road and the entire valley, and worked my way into some old-growth bushes. From there, I watched as my friend started going down the road, and within an instant I saw something else just off the road behind my friend. It was big and black and stood upright on 2 legs, and it was fast. It had a weird, flippy-floppy, zigzagging gait, but it zipped from tree to tree incredibly fast, following my friend as he walked down the road. In an instant, I knew that this thing was the watcher that had been spying and watching us all week, and it was not a bear. I raised my rifle and tried to see it through the scope. My first glimpse of it was its head and upper body. It had the head of a dog. I swear it had the head of a huge dog. A little stunned, I suddenly remembered my training and lowered my rifle sight to its legs. I saw huge muscular legs like those you would see on an Olympic heavyweight lifter. Its short, dense black fur became sparse, going down to its feet, and those toes had huge curved talons, not nails. They weren't quite as big as the velociraptor dinosaur talons from the Jurassic Park movies that everyone in the Western world has seen, but they were almost as big, and they looked incredibly lethal, like overkill, lethal in a split second. I took this all in. Then I pulled the rifle back up to sight on its head and chest, and it was staring back at me, staring directly at me from about 100 yards away. I got a good look as it stared at me. It had a huge head, I would say much bigger than a human. It had short, smooth black fur and a huge jaw that was slightly parted. I saw large, white canine teeth in its mouth. Its eyes were deep, dark red, and as I watched, it started to squint its eyes and really got a good look at me. The longer I looked at it and it looked back at me, my brain tried to compare it to other dogs I've seen in my life. To me, its head looked like a cross between a German Shepherd and a black lab, but it was huge, absolutely huge. I got the sense that this thing was mean and pissed off. I instinctively decided to shoot it. Just as I put my finger on the trigger of my AR and was about to pull it, I was interrupted by the noise of a vehicle coming up the dirt road in the distance. I stopped sitting on the beast for an instant and looked down the road, and then I swung my gaze back to the beast. It was gone. I lowered my rifle and scanned for it, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was running away, faster than anything I've ever seen run. It ran through the trees, so fast it was a blur, and was running on two legs. Then it burst out of the tree line and went to all four limbs and actually increased its speed. It started going through a boulder field and then took off upslope at such a terrific speed that I remember saying to myself out loud, "You've got to be kidding me! Nothing runs that fast." I watched as it got to the steep granite mountainside across the valley, and it just went straight up it, seemingly floating over the rock. It was so fast, and it was gone in seconds. I tried to process what I had seen. As the vehicle came up the road, it was a U.S. Forest Service Jeep with a ranger inside, making his rounds for the week. The ranger stopped and talked to my friend down in the road, and I watched as they chatted away. Eventually, my friend finished talking to the ranger, then he started up his Jeep and drove off. My friend started hiking back to the cabin. When my friend returned to the cabin, it was late in the day, and I told them we'd be leaving the next day. Obviously, I walked around outside the cabin, heavily armed after that. A little while later, I noticed the ranger in his Jeep parked down at my access road gate. I walked down there to chat, as I've known that guy for about the past 10 years. We talked about nothing for a few moments, and then I said, "Hey, have you ever seen or heard reports of a huge dog running around these parts?" The guy looked at me oddly and very coldly said, "We don't talk about that stuff." Without another word, he started his Jeep and drove off as I was in the middle of saying, "What do you mean? What aren't you saying? What's going on?" I looked back up the road thinking to myself, what the heck is going on up here? It's never been like this before, and so forth. I walked back to the cabin. I couldn't get the image of that dog face with the red eyes out of my head that night. Inside the safety of the cabin, my friend chattered on about how good the hike was while I listened. Absent-mindedly, I replayed over and over in my head the events of that day. My mind kept returning to the image I had seen in my rifle scope and began filling in details that I hadn't noticed in the heat of the moment of that first real look at the creature. I finally got a few hours of sleep and slept in a bit. The next morning, I woke happy to see the daylight and thinking for the first time in my life that I'd be glad to leave the cabin that day. But little did I know our last day at the cabin would turn out to be the strangest one of all. After breakfast, we made a cold lunch for the drive back home. We then started cleaning the cabin interior and decommissioning all of its utilities. We had barely gotten started when we heard barking dogs in the distance. You see, there's a poacher problem in some national parks and forests in the USA. Poachers go out of season without permits and kill wildlife for profit in the area. The prey of choice for these poachers is bears. We call them dog runners. What they do is bring up a bunch of dogs to the forest and let them loose to track down bears. Then the poachers follow the dogs, usually on dirt bikes. When the dogs tree the bears, or trap them in their hibernation dens, the poachers then ride up and shoot and kill the bear. Once dead, they cut off the bear's paws, cut out its gallbladder, and then leave the bulk of the bear to rot for the buzzards. The poachers then sell their bear parts to Asian apothecaries who use the ground-up bear claws and gallbladder to make aphrodisiacs and sell them for big money. The word around town is that a single bear can make a poacher $100,000. When I heard the dogs and the dirt bikes in the distance, I knew it had to be a bunch of dog runners taking advantage of the dirt road in the valley being free of ice and snow to come up and make some extra cash during the winter. The first thing I did was get on my satellite phone and call the closest ranger station. They know me as I've called many times down the years. When I told the ranger on the line what was going on, he said they actually had a couple of rangers in the general area and they would radio them and send them. But that wasn't good enough to save whatever bear the dog runners were running down right then and there. I thought about what to do, and I instinctively took my .357 out of its holster and fired a shot into the ground. In the distance, I heard the dogs stop barking for a moment and then resume their noise. I then fired the remaining 5 rounds as quickly as I could into the ground again. That time, I heard the dogs stop barking and the dirt bike stopped racing around. I had a couple of quick shot loaders in my pocket, so I loaded another 6 rounds into my revolver as quickly as I could before the dirt bike could start up again. I fired another 6 rounds as fast as I could into the ground again. After that, I actually heard shouting in Korean from the dirt bikers. Then I heard sounds of the dogs being cuffed around, and it sounded like they were headed back to their vehicle. Now, put yourself in their shoes. Here they were in the back of Beyond doing something hugely illegal, and all of a sudden they heard shots fired like a crazy person on the loose. Rather than deal with that, they hightailed it out of there. They were actually playing as smart even though they were doing a really dumb thing, running down bears in the wilderness. My friend and I listened to the fading sounds of the dog runners. For a while after that, we heard them stop their dirt bikes, I guess to put them back on their truck. Then we heard their truck, or van, or whatever drive back down the dirt road. We sat outside the cabin for a while after that. About half an hour later, my satellite phone rang, and the ranger on the other end announced proudly, "We got them. We got the dog runners." They thanked me profusely and asked me to stop at the station on the way home to make a statement and so forth. My friend and I sat in our folding chairs in the carport and discussed what had just gone down with the dog runners, and I explained what I knew about them. That's when things really got really weird, as if it hadn't been a weird enough week already. First, all of a sudden, we heard a soft sound like a very faint musical talking. It was very soft, very seductive, with little tweets and clicks and what sounded like little bells and whistles. At the same time, it was a very dense noise and seemed to be coming from the east of the cabin. It was the kind of noise that just begs to be followed and investigated because it is so beautiful and you just have to know what's making it. Okay, for want of any other words to describe it, I'll call it fairy music. Then it started to the north, then to the west. At that point, we got up from our chairs, which were facing east, and walked over to the west side of the cabin. Then it started coming from the south. It was all around us. We were surrounded by these ethereal sounds from beyond that were more beautiful than anything I'd ever heard before. My friend took a step forward and said, "Let's go see what's making that beautiful sound." But something inside me snapped, and I said out loud, "Absolutely not." And I fired my revolver into the forest to the west. And the instant I fired, the fairy music ended. I got my instinctive gut feeling that was warning me something was terribly wrong, that we had to just avoid it. By that time, I had enough of all these weird shenanigans. I told my friend that we needed to get the heck out of there. I finished packing the Jeep and got ready to launch from the cabin. I locked the cabin up and we sat for one last time in the folding chairs, looking out to the east at the forest and down the hill to the dirt road winding through it. All of a sudden, a loud whine started from down in the direction of the road. It was loud, echoing around the valley, and it sounded like a huge dog in mortal, life-threatening pain, like it was dying right then and there. It didn't stop. It went on and on. Then it changed to a howl of rage that went on and morphed into an all-out roar of furious, pent-up frustration, and finally ended with an abrupt yelp. I had my handgun out the instant the howl started. As it ended, the echo began dying around us. I fired one round towards the road, and another howl started up to the north of us, a little less loud from a further distance away. I fired another shot in that direction, and it stopped mid-howl. Another howl started to the south, also further away, and I turned and shot in that direction. The howl stopped. There were 3 of them, 3 dogmen, a pack of dogmen, and they had us pretty much surrounded. All of a sudden, my friend said, "That sounds like a dogman." I said, What the heck is a dogman? But I knew the instant that I uttered those words that dogman was its name, or at least the name people give to that beast. We rapidly got in the Jeep and left the cabin, and nothing else happened on the long ride back down the dirt road. Of course, we talked nonstop about dogmen and recounted the experiences of the week to one another. When I got back to the city, I began researching dogmen on the internet. At first, I found very little real information. Remember, this was 5 years ago when my first Dogman encounter happened. Since then, much more has come out about this beast, and encounters with it have substantially increased in just a few years. From the woo-woo, wackadoodle New Age nut jobs claiming Dogman is just a poor, lonely little critter that only wants to be loved, to people who have been actually hunted by Dogmen. The stories abound, and there seem to be more of them each and every day. In the end, after being hunted by a small pack of these creatures for a week in the remote wilderness, I have some final words about dogmen. It is absolutely real. How do you think werewolf legends got started? Consider that all legends start as real and factual, and they get glorified as time goes on. All legends start with the kernel of truth. Dogman could well be the creature that began the werewolf legends. Dogman appears to be poised at the top of the food chain in the wilderness and is the apex predator on land, much like the great white shark or the orca killer whales are in the ocean. But Dogman is almost completely unknown by mankind. Dogman is not exactly an animal, and it's obviously not a human. It is something in between. It is supremely intelligent. It has a huge brain case from what I saw of its head through my rifle scope. It is much larger than a human skull. Dogman and its fellows in the pack plotted and planned and waited for an entire week to catch me and my friend with our guard down, and was finally thwarted. The frustration in its howl was as good as him screaming in words, I lost. This beast is very intelligent, and it watches, waits, and plans. It was obviously aware of the power of firearms. Even so, after hearing and watching me discharge my sidearm multiple times during the dog runner incident, it somehow manifested the beautiful music to lure us away from the cabin and our cache of firearms. I will close this letter now with this final word. Please remember, Dogman is not evil because it is a predator and preys on other animals. Dogman is evil because it can plot and plan to kill humans, like it did with me and my friend for an entire week. It didn't need me for meat or sustenance. It did it because it thought it could win. It did it as an exercise. Anything that kills for so small a reason does so simply because it can. That is evil. That was just my first Dogman encounter, and I've had many more. I hope someday to share them with you. Thanks for letting me get this off my chest. I have shared this story in previous threads as part of the general conversation. I haven't made an individual post until now. I'm a little bit older than most folks here, mea culpa. I am posting from mobile, so I'll try to be brief and to the point. Also, I need to leave the name of the specific town out, as it would be a dead giveaway to my IRL identity. I've always been into the paranormal, as most of us that visit this thread are. In January 2019, I noticed something lumbering down my driveway. The window I was looking out faces over and above the drive, if that's clear. For example, I can see the roof of your car, but not always the bottom of the tire. Regardless, I notice movement. I look out and see what I initially thought was a bear, nose to the ground, kind of snuffling its head side to side, casually walking down the drive on all fours. A little geographical clarity. I live in town. The front of my neighborhood faces a major highway, but the back is all state game lands. I've seen some wildlife, turkeys, a deer here and there, and every skunk in the county apparently lives on my street. I don't see many squirrels, groundhogs, or chipmunks, which is a bit odd. I'm not not very far from the city of Scranton, enjoy Office fans, about 7 miles from downtown, so I'm not exactly in the sticks. I watched this bear mosey down toward the street, its head lowered. I moved from the living room window to my bedroom window that has a full view of the street. Sure enough, here it comes. But something is wrong. I watch this not bear stand on 2 legs and casually walk out onto the road. I see pointed ears and a long snout. It's got its head raised, smelling the air. I felt pee run down my legs. This was no bear. I saw it in perfect silhouette under the yellow street light. It was either dark gray or black. The yellow light threw off the true color. It stood without effort, looked like one fluid movement. It then walked across the road, casual as you please, and kind of hunkered down in some scrub brush. I'm not sure what kind of brush, but it's like forsythia, all tangled and thick. Then I realized it was looking right into my bedroom. It had blue eyes. I'm not sure if that was reflected light, if they were glowing. It looked right at me. I lost my legs at that moment and sat down under my window, absolutely panicked. I was home alone with 5 cats and a dog who slept through the whole thing. I didn't know what to do. My window is a big picture window, and if it wanted me, it easily could have gotten me. I cautiously got on my knees to peek over the sill, and I lost it. Didn't see eyes or it anywhere. It seemed to be either moving away from the forest, behind my house, or it decided to rest up in that scrub brush. What I saw under the streetlight is as follows: darkish fur, high pointed ears, long muzzle. I never saw teeth or if it had a tail. It had hands with long claws that hung kind of limp wrist. If they were fully extended, they would hang below the knee. It walked digitigrade on dog legs. It looked heavily muscled but had a tapered waist. It was about 7 to 7.5 feet tall, judging from where it stood in relation to the streetlight. It was non-aggressive, even when I felt it look right at me. I was terrified, but I didn't get a sense that it was pissed off it had been seen, as some people report. I didn't take a picture because I simply didn't think to. I was in a fair amount of shock, and I'm sure I'll eat shit for this, but sometimes your phone is the absolute last thing on your mind. The next day, I called Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters Radio. His advice was solid, and I try and remember it when I have to go out at night. There have been some odd sounds. Tapping at my window, I can hear scratching of the siding. I don't see that many animals around the neighborhood. There used to be about 7 stray cats I fed, all gone. Once the weather broke, it's been quiet. I installed motion lights and bought 2 game cameras. I'm hoping they are in a sense like Sasquatch. They avoid game cams. I don't ever want to see this thing again. Those of you who want to see one, pray you never do. My encounter was non-aggressive. I can't imagine having to deal with this thing pissed off. I still can't sleep a full night, and every sound scares the hell out of me after dark. I live alone, and the 357 I own would probably just ruffle its fur. Thank you for taking the time to read this. It was a terrifying animal to see. I hope I never see it again, but sadly, that wasn't in the cards. I'll post that story another time. Be careful out there, rando Redditors. You never know what's out there waiting. Another disturbing thought. If Dogman is real, what the fuck else is? There are well over 100 comments on this post, and it was impossible to choose just a few. If you want to dig deeper, the link is in the description below. A few months back, one of my friends opened up to me about a creature he said he encountered 2 times around New Jersey, where my mother lives. This same friend and I have encountered a skinwalker in the past while being in New Jersey, and he told me when he was just a boy, he saw something in the fields next to his house. Whatever he saw still terrifies him to this day. He's had 2 encounters with this creature, one in the middle of the day when he was a boy, and one waking up in the middle of the night. Here are his encounters with an alleged dogman. These stories are also from his perspective, so I could capture that narrative feel. I hope you enjoy his stories. Hi, my name is Ted, and I've lived in New Jersey all my life. Since I was a kid, I've had all sorts of paranormal and creature experiences for a long time, which I can also tell here in the future at some point. I'm a heavy believer in the supernatural and in Dogman and Cryptids, just like my friend Sam here. Here are 2 of my encounters with what I think are dogmen. It was a clear, sunny day as I was walking alongside a trail that was close to my house. I was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time. It was so beautiful out that day, and as a young kid, I was taking it all in. I was having an adventure, picturing myself just running through the open fields, waiting for Mom and Dad to get home. The trail I was on had beautiful scenery all around, with tall grass and miles of fields to my left and dense forest to my right. I was just walking through the woods, as whenever my parents weren't home, that's what I used to do. I was enjoying the walk, taking in all the feels of nature. The smell of the woods was intoxicating, as well as the chirping birds. Then the woods fell silent. I felt like someone or something was watching me, and my eyes darted around the entire area. I then looked to my left and noticed something in the tall grass. To me, it looked like a big dog, but then I saw it was crouched down like a man would be if he were hiding. It was covered in brown fur, looked like it had a muzzle and ears like a German shepherd, and had eyes that were blood red. I thought it was more curious than frightening to me, but I was still on edge. I was scared for a bit, but I acted like I didn't notice it and just went along with my day and ran back to my house. I never spoke about this encounter with any of my family, as they would think I'm crazy, but that was my first encounter with what I think was a dogman. The second encounter only happened about 4 to 5 years ago. At this point, I lived in a different house. This house was close to a large forest, and the biggest predators I've seen around here have been either coyotes or foxes. Now, what I saw that night was no coyote. I woke up in the middle of the night with my throat dry and realized I was thirsty. I went to the kitchen to get some water when I felt a sudden sense of dread and felt like I was being watched. I looked into the window close to where I was, and to my horror, I saw this huge animal in my backyard. Whatever it was noticed me, and it was staring at me with these crimson red eyes. I felt utterly terrified, and to my horror, I saw the animal bare its teeth at me and stand up on 2 legs. This creature then started growling, and I could hear it as my window was opened slightly. I also saw its breath come out of its mouth, and I realized that this was a real animal. It looked to be about 7 to 8 feet tall on both legs, with the head of a German shepherd and a body shaped like a bodybuilder. Whatever it was, then looked at the fence in my yard, ran to it, and jumped across it into the woods below. I went back to my bed, terrified, and couldn't sleep at all that night. These 2 encounters with these beings have shook me to the core and made me realize that there are creatures that science refuses to recognize. Hey, my name is Sage, and I had an encounter with a dogman. So it was the winter of 2021. I was walking with 2 of my friends. We had went down a trail. It was pretty wet from the dissolved snow, but we went on, and it was pretty dark, but we were walking back from a party that went to. As we walked, we could feel the sensation of something with sinister intentions watching us. As we walked on another trail, we turned on a slight path that took a turn into a wide tree line. As an Indigenous and Black person, I didn't want to go in there. But my friends insisted, so we went into the tree line and we saw something that would almost get us killed. A large, muscular man, but also a dog with large amounts of drool or slobber. It stood around 7 or 8 feet, and its hands were as big as a pillow, and it had large, knife-like talons, nails, or claws. We had stopped dead in our tracks, and I ran with all the strength and speed I had, and as I ran, I heard big thumps like 10 meters behind me. My friends ran the opposite direction, but I didn't care. I never looked back, and as I ran, I heard my friends' blood-curdling screams. As that beast ran towards them, I ran until I stopped and looked back, and I seen the beast running as fast as a car. I ran and ran until I found my aunt's house. I haven't seen my friends in 3 years, and I still haven't went on that trail ever again. Here are the comments from this post. SuperNope87 commented, "Is this in Michigan? I used to live in Big Rapids, Michigan, and have heard many stories of the Michigan Dogman." OP responded to SuperNope87, "Yes, this did take place in Michigan." This is my first post on Reddit. I joined because this forum had some leads on what I saw 2 years ago. It was the evening when I was driving from my house to the local Walmart. I drove around a bend that was maybe 0.2 miles from my house. I was driving slowly because people will fly through that road from a connecting lane and get into accidents. It was overcast, but not dark yet. I glanced to the side of the road. I always scanned that area because random things kept getting dumped there, and occasionally I discarded pets that would need to be rescued. Editing Jen here. I think OP meant to say discovered pets, not discarded. I was about 6 or 7 feet away from what I saw. At first I thought, oh, a fox, but then immediately recalculated due to the size, almost like my brain was trying to figure out what I was looking at, and then thought, a man in a wolf costume? It was lying on its side and sort of propping itself up. I got a very good look at it as I stopped the car and stared. It was reddish brown and had canid facial features and was covered in fur, but the proportions were like a human. It was at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It made eye contact with me, and it was like it grinned at me. Its jaw opened, and I saw sharp incisors and rows of sharp teeth. I was close enough that I could see the muscle movement in its face and jaw when it did that. That's the part where I slowly started the car and thought, that's not human. It kept eye contact with me as I drove around the bend until it was out of view. It was almost as if it was saying, I know you see me, I see you too. It didn't seem aggressive or angry, almost like it was amused. My coping mechanism for what I call crazy is to go emotionally numb and, like a robot, focus on the immediate task. So that day I kept driving and got the items I needed from the store, almost like I was in low-level shock. When I drove back, the creature wasn't there anymore. I didn't feel the fear that some people have described, but there was an awareness that this was a predator above the human step in the food pyramid, which was unsettling. I also didn't get the vibe it was going to harm me, but that if I tried to attack it, that I would regret it. Any thoughts on what that was? Dogman? Spirit? Any input is appreciated. After the initial shock wore off, I have been trying to find more info on what it was and have found very little. It's been 2 years, and I haven't seen it since. Random other paranormal things before and after, but unrelated to this, it seems. Sorry, this was so long. Thanks so much for reading. Here are some of the comments from this post. Black Cats, Black Bats commented, I've had my own encounter. I was absolutely terrified and shocked at what I was seeing. Check my post history for the full story. I know the feeling, the disbelief, self-doubt, the whole 9 yards. I watched mine walk down my drive on all fours and then stand and walk across the street. I peed my pants. My encounter was benign compared to some, but I'm still afraid after dark. I try not to leave my house unless absolutely necessary. I have nightmares. Also, activity is ongoing. I hear scratching, tapping. I'm positive I saw it look in my window on at least one occasion. I'm coming up on a year since the sighting, and the most bothersome question is, what the fuck else is real? I hope you're all right. Keep your head on a swivel and stay out of that area for a while. Good luck and be careful, my friend. Could you glean any more physical description? Size, color, tail, visible fangs? OP responded to black cats, black bats. It was about 7 feet tall at least, reddish brown, not as red as a fox, lighter colored belly and muzzle, very noticeable fangs, and the muzzle seemed to be not quite right to be a dog or wolf. Something about the dimensions were off, even taking the size of the thing into account. It's right by my house, and I can't move. The last 4 years since I moved here, in general, have been an education into what I always dismissed as mumbo-jumbo. And I agree, it's unsettling to not know what is out there. I'm fortunate, at least, in that I never got the impression that it was going to pay me a visit. I'm sorry that you have had so much trauma from your encounter. I hope it starts to get better. I think part of the reason I wasn't as scared as I should have been is because growing up in the north in the woods of Ontario, I had several encounters with, I can't say or even type the word as it scares me so much. And by comparison, this wasn't as bad. At least you're dealing with it head on. I just had a mental block with my memories, and that doesn't really work long term. Black Cats, Black Bats responded to OP. I strongly suggest you get in contact with Vic Cundiff of Dogman Encounters Radio on YouTube. He helps eyewitnesses just like us process what we've seen. He was an absolute godsend. He's kind and will take you very seriously. I've spoken to him several times, and every few months he calls or texts to just see how I'm doing. Maybe listen to a few episodes and see what you think. I'm sorry to hear you've encountered the North Woods aberration. I know what you refer to. I can't imagine that horror. I thought of selling my home too, but finances. So for now, I just put up with it. I installed extra lights and a few game cameras. Now that fall is here. Activity is on the rise. I just hope like hell it keeps its distance like last time if I see him head on again. I'll ignore the bangs and knocks and scratches. Part of me feels it wants a fear reaction. I'll do my best to just hope he goes away. That's about all I can do, considering if it wants me, it'll get me. OP responded to black cats, black bats. I will. Thank you for your response. It's very beneficial just to know that these things have a name, and I'm not the only one. I live in the US now, and I've never gotten any sense of the aberrations, but I am very grateful for that. I miss the air and the smell of the earth up there, but not enough to deal with those nightmares again. I wonder if the one you are dealing with is curious and wants a reaction. Either way, I think what you are doing is best. Treat it like you would a potentially dangerous person. No interaction, no engagement. You can't trust how people on the road will react, let alone bipedal apparitions. Black cats, black bats responded to OP. I've had people go so far as to tell me it's a class of guardian. I don't think so, unless nightmares are actually protectors. There are many more amazing comments on this post. If you would like to dig deeper, the link is in the description below.